This video is an exercise in using a limited palette. I will try to paint with only 5 colors and see if my paintings will look interesting and colorful or they will turn out boring. In this demonstration, I'll be painting with 3 secondary colors. They come from Daniel Smith's secondary set. The colors are burnt orange, undersea green, and carbazole violet, and I will also add a yellow and a cool red to them. The reference photos that I selected, they were suggested by a friend of mine, and one of them I found online. They all have beautiful shades of gray, brown, kind of rust colors, so I will try to recreate all of them by using only the pigments that I selected. For this painting, I'm using Steven Quiller's round palette. Pigments on it I arrange according to the color wheel. So you see the places where the secondaries are marked with those pointy arrows. And I'm going to sketch my composition on 300-pound cold press watercolor paper. This is Archie's block. So just a quick pencil drawing to locate those thistles, those pineapples, so it's a little easier for me to paint them. I'm going to start wet on wet. I'm going to wet my paper real quick. I was going to start with a yellow wash, but maybe I better wet the paper first. And then start applying Hansa yellow to create that sunlit field that's behind my thistles. Let's drop in some burnt orange. And I'm going to pick up the water where those thistles are going to be. I just don't want to lose them under the wash, so I will try to keep them dry so that the background wash doesn't run into them. And I can immediately start dropping some undersea green that I mixed with the orange to create grasses in the background. The wash is fairly light. I think the thistles will need to be darker than the wash, the leaves at least, and the stems. With those prickly pineapples, whatever you call them, the flowers, I guess, we will have to see. Let's drop in some purple as well, just for variety. Mixing purple, this is carbazole violet, with orange gives me very nice brown color, warm brown, and mixing it with green gives me a gray. So I'm already getting some neutral tones with just 3 pigments that I'm using for this painting. That carbazole violet is very intense, so as I started applying it, I am immediately building a lot of tonal range on my painting, which is a good thing. I don't want everything to be super pale, and I can kind of work negatively, add those darks in some places, and leave the light wash that I started with in other places. Let's do the same for green. Now that it's softened, I can actually get some darker color. And of course, you know that watercolor will lighten quite a bit after it dries, so this might not even be enough pigment, even though it looks very intense right now. I'm trying to apply those grasses in all different directions. It probably looks like a mess right now, but it will make sense as the painting progresses. I just know that for some reason I tend to apply those. When I paint grass, I tend to apply everything either parallel or at the same angle. So I am really trying to have it go in all different directions, and which makes it look natural and not like some sort of geometric design. I want to pick up color where the stems and the flowers are going to be, those pineapple heads. I can even help myself with the paper towel. Just important to have a clean spot on the towel, not to spread pigment everywhere. Those leaves look pretty light, so I want to have the opportunity to make them lighter so I can decide where exactly on the tonal scale they're going to be. Also helps me to check the composition of my painting because I can barely see my pencil line at this point. the background, before I let it dry, maybe just a few more drops of yellow, because the top, I can see it's already starting to lighten on me, and it's going to be basically invisible by the time everything dries. So let's drop a little more pigment on the top here. Also create some blades of grass just for make it look more interesting. I'm going to let the background dry. Here it is after it dried. You see it lightened quite a bit. I have a little bit of tonal variation here in the background. I'm going to work on the flower itself, on the thistle, and then I will decide if I need to darken the background or not. Because thistles have very light green color. I don't have that pigment on the palette. That undersea green is the only one I have. If I mix it with my Hansa yellow, I can actually get pretty nice light green. As I'm sure you know, it's using the same pigments for the whole painting, using a limited palette usually results in more harmonious painting, which I am hoping to demonstrate with this video. So even though I am not matching that light green that I see in the thistles exactly, it will not matter for the final result of this painting, I hope. And you can let me know in comments if you agree with me after you see the finished painting at the end of this video. In a few minutes, I'll show you another painting that I created of the same plant. So my friend will have a pair because she has a big empty wall, so she needed a couple of paintings. And I will use all the same pigments, but the result will look a little bit different. And as I said in the beginning, I use the same pigments to paint from a photo I found online. So 3 paintings from just 5 pigments, and you will also see it. I switched to a dagger brush to work on the leaves, if you can call that, those spikes that stick out of those thistles in every which direction. A small dagger brush has been my favorite lately. I much prefer using that for small details instead of a liner brush that I used before. This gives me a lot more control over the line thickness. It holds a lot more pigment. I don't have to pick up the pigment after each brush stroke. It has a lot more snap. It gives me a lot better control. So just in general, lots of advantages of using this over some sort of a rigger or a liner brush. So still using just the purple and the green to paint the thistle itself. Attempt to convey the texture. So painting a little bit of negative painting the spaces between those light colored, those white spikes that those pineapples are covered with. And let's work on the leaves here, lower down on the plant. If you notice, I'm not defining those leaves. I'm not completely defining those leaves. I don't want them to look glued on top of my background. I want them to work with the background. So it's a good idea to leave a little open spaces when painting something like that, that will unify the subject with the background. And you can always add a few brush strokes and kind of close that leaf, define that leaf a little better if you need to, instead of overworking it, and then it will be hard to take the pigment away, especially something like that Corbazole Violet, which is very staining. So it will be pretty much impossible to lift. Okay, here my cool red. My quinacridone rose is coming into play because I am trying to replicate those lighter leaves that have a lot of pink in them. And the pink it will be created from quinacridone rose with addition of some of that violet. Just moving down the plant and painting all the details on top of my background. Let's unify some of those brush strokes that I applied before. This is what I was talking about. I can add pigment in some areas and still create that loose kind of expressive effect without overworking my painting. If I paint it very precisely and detailed from the start, the painting very easily can become overworked. I need to add some details to the top pineapple. A little more precision on the leaves. They're mostly green, so I'm using undersea green. In some places in intense concentration, they're fairly dark on one side where they're in core shadow. Important to bring those leaves to a fine point because they're very spiky and pointy. You really need a thin brush to get that done, and dagger brush works great for this. Maybe a few brush strokes on the background to show all those grasses, give them a little more definition, just to connect my subject to at least 3 sides of my paper. It's connected on the bottom and connected on the right, so I'm going to connect it over here a little better. I feel like I didn't use very much of burnt orange, so I'm going to add that. I see there are some like dry grasses on the bottom, so burnt orange will be a good thing to add. Dagger brush is way too small for painting longer lines. It just doesn't hold enough pigment, so I'm going to switch to a larger round brush. This is number 10. And it's also important when you paint the background on one side of a blade of grass to continue the same color or at least the same tonal intensity on the other side. Otherwise, the grass will look like it's cutting your painting in two. It's not going to look logical. That burnt orange is really nice. Let's add it in a slightly larger area. It kind of unifies my thistle, makes it look more harmonious with the background. And I can feather it out on top like it's blades of grass, so it'll look like some dry grasses in the back. My second layer is dry. Everything lightened again. So even though it looked really dark when I was painting it, now it looks fine. I am going to mix my Carbazole Violet with Undersea Green to create basically black. And I am going to sprinkle it on my painting to add a little more visual interest in certain areas. Maybe smaller sprinkles with a smaller brush. And if I spritz them lightly with water from my spray bottle, they will start floating, and when they dry, they will look like very interesting texture in my painting. Also, some sprinkles are flying on top there. The top looks very light and kind of monotonous, so a little darker splatters on it is going to work really well. I think everything turned out a little too cool, so I'm going to add another wash of my Hansa Yellow to first of all help connect those thistles to the top of the page, and also to reinforce the diagonal movement that I have in my painting. And you see, as I'm starting to add yellow, it's like somebody turned on the sunlight. The painting acquires some warmth and doesn't look so gloomy anymore. Maybe a few yellow sprinkles as well. It always looks interesting when you add yellow to a darker color. Yellow pigment pushes dark colors away and creates even more interesting textures. Those thistles have lighter areas on each side where those white spikes are, and I lost those when I was working on the background, so I'm going to scrub them back out and also clean up my painting a little more, soften some things with a stiff scrubber brush, and I also have a paper towel to pick up the pigment off the brush and also off the paper. So just a little cleanup real quick, maybe bring in some highlights back into those grasses that I have, give them a little definition. This area looks very dark. Maybe I'll introduce some grasses here. Just instead of that dark blob, I'll have some texture and some movement. I also over darkened the stem of the plant itself, so I need to lift some paint. That Carbazole Violet doesn't lift, but when you scrub it and pick it up with a paper towel, it actually looks exactly like what I see in the reference photo, those lighter areas on the leaves and on the stems. Okay, this is quite enough. Last thing I need to do is bring back my highlights. Because the spikes on the thistles are so fine, I am going to use a white pencil so I can sharpen it really well and draw the small details. These are Prismacolor pencils. It's just a regular color pencil. It's not watercolor or anything. And I'm going to draw all those fine details and the spikes with my white pencil. I'll introduce this light green as well. It looks pretty good. I have to have my pencil sharpener handy because that pencil disappears very quickly. That watercolor paper is like sandpaper and it kind of eats up the pencil very, very quickly. My painting is starting to take shape. All the small details really make a difference. And now that I have the highlights, I see that I need to darken just a few areas on the plant itself. So I'm going back to my mixture of undersea green and carbazole violet, which creates very dark, basically black color. And I'm going to add just a few very dark accents here and there to accentuate some of the leaves a little bit more. Maybe a few more details with undersea green. When in those places where I picked up pigment, I think some of them, so they don't look so monotonous, I'm going to drop in just a light wash of undersea green. My painting is done. Here is the final result. I took a photo in a better light. This is what the painting looks like. And I'll take a few more minutes of your time to show you another version done from a different photo of the same plant. I wasn't particularly happy with the composition in the reference photo, so I did a quick sketch on my iPad to resolve the composition, and then I basically used the same 5 colors to paint another version. And because I distributed those colors a little differently when I mixed them in different proportions than I did in the first painting. You will see it will look like a companion painting for the first one, but I think it looks pretty different and colorful as well. Even though I did neutralize the colors, I still mixed purple with green to create black, but the painting turned out pretty colorful. And this is the third version that I painted from a photo that I found online. I left you the link in the description if you wanted to paint from that online reference. Here are all the paintings together. Let me know in comments which one you like better, first, second, or third. It's hard for me to decide because they're all my creations. I love them all, but you might have a preference. I hope it showed that even a very limited palette can create beautiful, varied artwork. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video here on Tammy Rep Studios channel. This plant is called purple pineapple. This plant is called purple pineapple thistle. I'll try saying this 3 times really fast.